Shams Charania has dropped some massive news regarding the Sixers' outlook heading to the NBA trade deadline. Talks are heating up and the vibes are high following a massive performance by Joel Embiid as they defeated the defending champion Nuggets last night. We're going to dive into all that right here on Sixers Digest. And before we get fully into it, I want to begin by introducing a new member of the channel, Eddie Averill, right here. He's going to be with you on the channel moving forward a bunch. You're going to see his face all the time. And I also want to mention that as we expand right here on Sixers Digest, make sure you are hitting that subscribe button that almost 81% of you guys have not subscribed to the channel. We're going to have plenty of content heating up as we get closer to the deadline. So, Eddie, how we doing? And what's your vibe check on this Sixers team right now?
Oh man, I'm doing fantastic. I'm happy to be here. I mean, right now my vibes were great until I saw that subscriber ratio. What are you guys doing? Come on, hit the
Yeah,
button.
absolutely. And let's get into the meat and potatoes of this episode right here. Shams revealing the Sixers trade plan. So a lot of buzz and about what the Sixers are going to do. One of the teams that I would say there's the most reliant on as we lead things. And Shams hopped on his FanDuel show where he revealed a little bit of the Sixers plan. And Shams was a little bit around beating around the bush a little bit for what the mindset is. But the main concept that he was bringing out was that he expects the Sixers to be measured, was his quote with things, that he does not expect this all in approach to dive in and find that final piece. He kind of went around and talked about how there is some optimism by going through things with Tobias Harris, with this core Sixers team, seeing what Tyrese Maxey looks like in the postseason. So, Eddie, what is your mindset on that? Do you think this is something that they have to go in and get that missing piece, or are you comfortable with this Sixers team as it is?
Throughout this whole season, I've been saying the upgrades have to come around the edges. A star doesn't really do much, especially when you're going to really handicap yourself and lock into that star contract, whether it's LaVine, especially, or someone with a slightly more reasonable deal like Murray or Siakam. I really think that this team is all about the two-man game of Maxey and Embiid and really just beefing up the supporting cast as much as possible. So I really think that role players are where they need to upgrade. You're near the bottom in three-pointers a game, and that's what you need off the bench right now is people who can just score. You don't need a Zach LaVine. You need some really good connecting guys, I think. So I
Yeah.
think what Shams is reporting, that's the right way to approach this for the Sixers.
Yeah, and interesting, Morey being a guy that keeps things close to the vest for what his plans are. He's been a general manager that obviously has a ton of experience, well respected around the league. And an interesting names that were brought up here, the three biggest pieces on the trade market that seem to be around the NBA are obviously Pascal Siakam, Dejounte Murray, and Zach LaVine. Now, I want to note that Pascal Siakam does seem to be off the table, that all signs are pointing him being traded to the Indiana Pacers, which frankly, I do think is a better landing spot for him than here in Philadelphia. But it does feel like there's more legs to the Zach LaVine and Dejounte Murray trade talks. Now, I'll begin by saying personally, I've talked myself into the Dejounte Murray side of things a little bit. And one of the driving forces is that contract. As you mentioned, Eddie, that the LaVine contract is quite extreme, and we're going to touch on that. But when you look at Murray, already under contract, has that extension. And when you're looking at these base salaries of 24.7 all the way up to 30 mil in that 27-28 season, a little bit more manageable there. So talk to me about how you feel about Murray as an on-court fit and what you think that contract and obviously the expectations commitment that comes with it.
Well, Murray, I almost wanted to leave off of that list when I was talking about the bigger targets because of how much more reasonable his contract is. I mean, his contract is only a couple more million a year than some of the more role player guys that people are talking about, whether it's either the Bogdanoviches or something like that. So I really like him as a fit. I think that, that platoon of defense on guard is going to be a lot better. I think Melton is already doing a great job and he's going to fit right in with that. I think having someone who can create in the mid range like he does, you want maybe the threes to be a little better, but his creation at the mid range is so incredible, and that'll be a great way to keep the offense rolling when Maxey and Embiid are on the bench or injured.
Yeah, and Murray's shooting a career high in three-point attempts this
Yeah.
year, which is at least moving in the right direction. Still would like to see some more volume in there, but that's at least encouraging to me. And while he has not been the defender that he was once marketed as those days back in San Antonio where he really shined on those side of the floor, we have seen that version of that player. And I do believe in a Nick Nurse system with a more defensive-oriented mindset that we could bring that back out of him. So I do have some optimism with Dejounte Murray, assuming the price tag is not too steep. And I did want to mention Zach LaVine, who you brought up. I think you make a great point about the contract there because look at these ridiculous numbers. We're talking about 48 million at the end of his contract. 40 million for this specific season. If you're making that deal, you are committing to Zach LaVine as the third piece of this Sixers team. And I frankly don't have that level of confidence in that being the case. Would you agree with me on that sentiment there?
Yeah, I mean, look, we've seen Morey take some contracts that he probably shouldn't have and then somehow flip them. Like he's so great at negotiating and holding out till he gets a great deal. The Zach LaVine contract is a disaster waiting to happen, even if it helps this year. Like, let's say there's a scenario where Zach LaVine is the third banana and, you get to the conference finals. What about 2027 when you owe him $48 million? He's picking up
Right.
that player option. There's no doubt about it. And so I really think that that's going to put us in a hole that even the great Morey can't dig himself out of. And how much are you going to mortgage your future for maybe 1, maybe 2 years of Zach LaVine's prime, and then another 2 years of his not prime with higher contract value, or really higher contract numbers, lower value?
And it's interesting, like Zach LaVine, I will say, I think has gotten a worse reputation than he deserves. That I think he's a better player than kind of the national perception of him is. A lot of it is he has been stuck in the Chicago situation that he clearly does not want to be in there, but that still comes with the price tag. That there is no getting around the dollar sign that is attached to him. And when we want to look at kind of comparing him and Dejounte Murray as players, when you look at them side by side, I'm not arguing that Dejounte Murray is the better player. When you compare them statistically and the way that they look, Zach LaVine a higher volume 3-point player, Murray a little bit better of the creator, but LaVine I would say is the more superior talent. And even when you look at the percentages, kind of blowing Murray off the table from an efficiency standpoint. So I'm not having this debate here, but I do think it is those contracts that it is a big factor in shying away from it. So when you kind of look at these guys, do you think either one of them are the right option for the Sixers to go all in? Or do you think Shams is correct in his reporting in that is this Morey playing mind games, trying to strike some value, or is this something where Morey genuinely believes maybe it's time to sit this one out at this deadline?
I mean, if I had to pick, I think Murray's easily the better option. But the thing is, that price is just going to be so high that I'm not sure it's worth it. And you might want to bump it down and get a guy whose contract is only, in the 8 to 12 million range
Mhm.
rather than 20 plus a year, because the prices right now are pretty high. The ratio of buyers to sellers right now is something that we haven't really seen in the league in a long time. Even Utah's not really a seller the way that a couple weeks ago we thought they were. See, that's what I was thinking. Like, oh, maybe you get Colin Sexton in there. He's shooting 38% from three or so. And then now the Jazz are 14-3, and maybe they're not selling. And so I can understand why Morey might be a little more conservative at this break, is because the prices are just getting driven up by this very highly competitive league. It's the closest to full league parity outside of like 3, 4 teams I've ever seen in my life. And maybe that really hurts the market in terms of if you're a buyer.
Yeah, and especially when you think about from the Sixers perspective, that Daryl Morey has not had an overwhelming just cabinet of assets to work with throughout his time here. That he's been constantly having to trade off contracts, whether it be Al Horford or other deals, Ben Simmons, that he has lived through that. That this is the first time that he kind of has all his chips, that he's able to do what he wants. And you got to make sure that you use those correctly. That if the option is not there at the deadline, there is no reason to force it. Now, I still have the mindset that you have to give this team every chance to compete, that you don't know how many years of this version of Joel Embiid that we are getting, that this guy looking like the best player in the NBA, Tyrese Maxey, an up and coming star. So I'd still want this Sixers team to be active, but I do get the mindset of, I guess, waiting and making sure that you're not using things too early.
The thing is, I think they can be active, and I really think that that's not going to for sure mortgage their future. I think
Mm-hmm.
moves around the edges are what they need. A few weeks ago, I was thinking, okay, they're one guy away from being potentially better than Boston. And now I'm thinking about it in the terms of maybe they're 3 role players away instead of
Mm-hmm.
one great player. Who knows? And I think that's just the much safer bet, because even if you do make a couple moves around the edges, let's say you land Caruso and let's say you land Colin Sexton or something. I much prefer Sexton to Clarkson because of the 3 point percentage. Then like I think that does a better job at both maintaining your core for the next couple years of focusing on around Embiid and Maxi, and giving them a great shot this year. I mean, just those two guys alone, if you somehow are able to get a good deal for Sexton and a guy like Caruso, that I think really locks in the Sixers as having only the Celtics to worry about in the postseason.
Yeah, and it's interesting because that's not the perception of Daryl Morey that we know him as this big game hunter, wanting to make a big splash, that he isn't a guy that kind of settles for these role players, but he's also really emphasized this cap space plan to make sure they have the most flexibility come this summer. So it's
Mhm.
interesting kind of the balance that he's going to strike there. And when you look ahead to this summer, that it really is Joel Embiid, Tyrese Maxey with a blank check attached to his name, and Paul Reed are the only guys that will be under contract. So Morey will have a chance to put his fingerprints on this roster. But that still brings me to this final question for you here is Is Tyrese Maxey ready to be the number two on a championship contending team? How do you feel about that, Eddie?
I feel great about that. I have to say, like there were some moments in the last week or so of Embiid's injury that Maxey looked like he was taking on maybe too big of a load, and then you look at the roster around him, and it's like, oh, that is really what it's all about: is building more supporting pieces for Maxey. I think Maxey's great scoring output this year alone puts him right up there. He can just lead a team like nothing, and I think especially the way that his two-man game with Embiid has flourished has really linked them together. And it's obvious to say, look at Jokic and Murray. That's a
Yeah.
two-man game that won a ring because of how good their two-man game was. And I think Maxey's so locked in at that level that he's absolutely ready to be the number two man on a championship team, so long as his number one's Embiid.
Yeah, absolutely. And the growth that he keeps showing is incredibly impressive from a playmaking standpoint, leading the league in minutes, all these other things. So very impressed with Tyrese Maxey bringing to the table. It is going to be exciting to see the direction the Sixers choose to go as the trade deadline approaches. We're going to have plenty of breakdowns for all the rumors, all the reports that are coming out for each target that the Sixers are considering. So Eddie, welcome to Sixers Digest. Everyone make sure you're smashing that subscribe button, dropping a like on this video, drop a comment. Let me know what your thoughts on this news from Charania. We'll be back with you next time right here on Sixers Digest. Peace.